It began like any other day in the bustling town of western Nigeria. The bright Nigerian sun was high in the sky. Its rays beating down on the streets were alive with the sounds of vendors hawking their wares, the aroma of spices and street foods filling the air. Children's laughter rang out as they played games of chase, weaving between the legs of passers-by. In the Adeyemi family compound, things seemed relatively normal on this particular afternoon. Babatunde, the respectable patriarch, sat in the shade of the veranda, sipping a cup of cold palo drink as he went over the accounts for his prosperous textile business. His wife Adanne, ever the dutiful homemaker, was in the kitchen preparing the evening meal, humming a traditional tune as she worked. Their son Idowu was in the backyard, meticulously cleaning his well-used car, getting it gleaming for another week of driving for the local taxi company where he worked. And their daughter Fumi. Well, she should have been studying diligently for her final exams at the university. But on this day, something was clearly weighing heavily on the bright young woman's mind. Fumi had been acting strangely over the past few weeks. The usual radiant smile that made her beauty shine even brighter was nowhere to be seen recently. She picked at her food, seemed distracted constantly, and there were even a few times Adanne had heard her becoming ill in the mornings. But whenever she asked if something was wrong, Fumi brushed it off with a dismissive, "I'm fine, Mama." On this sweltering afternoon, Fumi sat under the mango tree in the family compound, pulling absently at the grass as she mentally practiced the words she needed to finally say aloud. Her stomach seemed to twist into tighter knots with every passing minute. How would she break the news to her father? To her mother? To Idowu? She couldn't keep it a secret any longer. The physical evidence was becoming far too difficult to hide. Her hand drifted instinctively to her still flat belly, her throat tightening with fear of how her family would react when they learned the truth. Fumi Adanne's gentle voice carried from the kitchen, "Come inside and help me set the table for dinner." Fumi's head snapped up at the sound. This was her chance. If she didn't find her courage now, she may never have the resolve to reveal her life-altering situation. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Fumi rose to her feet and made her way inside. The tantalizing aromas of fried plantains, jollof rice, and egusi soup caused Fumi's empty stomach to rumble hungrily. But as she entered the kitchen and began pulling down plates and utensils with shaky hands, her appetite was squelched by the growing queasiness in her gut. "Is everything all right?" my daughter Adanne asked, noticing Fumi's trembling hands. "You don't seem yourself lately." Fumi opened her mouth to reply, but the words stuck in her dry throat. Taking another fortifying breath, she decided the truth simply had to come out now. "Actually, Mama, there is something I need to tell you all." Just then, Babatunde entered the kitchen with an empty glass, seeking a refill of his palm drink. "Ah, the evening meal smells delicious as always," my wifey smiled broadly, turning his attention to his daughter. "I hope you are hungry, Fumi. You are looking skinnier lately." "Father." Mama Fumi started hesitantly, her heart thundering in her chest as Idowu sauntered into the kitchen, wiping his sweaty brow with a rag. "I have something I must tell you. I am with a child." A deafening silence fell over the kitchen. Babatunde froze in place, the smile slipping from his weathered face as the glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the tile floor. Idowu's rag fell from his hands, mouth agape in stunned disbelief. Adanne's eyes grew wide, her hands flying to cover her mouth as the reality of Fumi's words hit her like a physical blow. "Child," she whispered. But how? With whom?" The look of shock and hurt on her mother's face caused shameful tears to burn at Fumi's eyes. But she knew she owed her family the whole truth, no matter how much it devastated them. "The child's father is a man named Akin," she said, her voice quavering. "A man I barely know." The sharp inhalation of breath from Babatunde was the only sound in the deathly silent room. And then, the explosion came. "How dare you," he bellowed, his face purpling with rage as he rounded on his only daughter. "How dare you bring such shame to this family, to defile yourself with some man you don't even know." "Papa." "It's not like that," Fumi cried, tears flowing freely now at her father's words. "It was a mistake. A horrible mistake that I deeply regret." "Regret it," Babatunde spat. advancing on Fumi with fists clenched at his sides. "You stupid, stupid girl. You have ruined everything. All my hopes, all my dreams for you gone. Because you couldn't keep your damned legs closed." "Baba." "Please," Adanne cried, trying to step between her raging husband and her distraught daughter. "There is still a way to handle this. We must be calm." But Babatunde would not be calmed. In a sudden burst of fury, he struck out, backhanding Adanne hard across the face, the force of the blow sending her crumpling to the floor. Mama Fumi sobbed. "I want you out of my house this instant," Babatunde roared, rounding back on his daughter with eyes full of hate and disgust. "You are no child of mine, not anymore." All rational thought drained from Fumi's shocked mind. She fled from the kitchen, from the house, as if the hounds of hell were snapping at her heels. Scenes of her childhood, happier times in that home, slipped through her mind's eye as she ran, blinded by tears. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get as far away from her father's wrath as possible. Lost in the haze of her anguish, Fumi didn't even feel the wetness on her face from the light rain that began to fall. She ran until her legs burned and her side ached. Finally, she collapsed on the soil in an alleyway on the outskirts of town, her body racked with sobs of grief, shame, and fear. As she lay there in the mud, the rain quickly becoming a torrent, she heard footsteps sloshing towards her. Looking up through eyes blurred by tears, she saw a familiar silhouette materialize through the sheets of rain. Fumi, her loving, steadfast mother. Without a word, her mother knelt and pulled Fumi into a tight embrace as she cried out the anguish of her shattered world. Fumi stroked her daughter's soaked hair, her own tears mingling with the rain as she kissed Fumi's forehead. "I'm here, my child," she whispered fiercely. "I will always be here for you, no matter what." That vow, that steadfast promise of a mother's undying love and devotion for her child, was the sole flicker of hope left in Fumi's desolate heart that night. As the storm raged around them, mother and daughter clung to each other, Fumi determined to be the anchor that would guide Fumi through the turbulent waters yet to come. The rain seemed fitting on that dark, sorrowful night when Fumi's world imploded. As the heavens opened up and poured down torrents upon the streets of the small Nigerian town, Fumi held her sobbing daughter tightly, rocking her like a child in the muddy alleyway where she had fled. "We will get through this together, my baby girl," Fumi whispered fiercely against Fumi's rain-soaked hair, her words the only lifeline in her daughter's sea of anguish and despair. "I will never abandon you, never." For what seemed an eternity, Fumi released the torrent of heartbreak that had been dammed inside her ever since learning of the life growing within her womb, the new life created by a single mistake with a virtual stranger. Her cries of sorrow echoed off the tin roofs and brick walls surrounding them, the sound swallowed up by the relentless downpour. But eventually, the racking sobs subsided into mere shuddering breaths. Fumi pulled back from the protective circle of her mother's embracing arms, her reddened eyes glistening in the dark. "What am I going to do, Mama?" she croaked, her voice hoarse and broken. "Father, he wants nothing to do with me." A fresh wave of tears spilled down her cheeks. "He has disowned me." Fumi reached out and cupped her daughter's face tenderly. "Your father was wrong to treat you that way," she said steadily, though her own heart shattered a little more at Babatunde's callous rejection. "He allowed anger to rule his actions. But I know in his heart he still loves you. We just need to give him time to see past this mistake." Fumi shook her head mournfully. "You didn't see the way he looked at me, Mama, like I was. Disgusting. Worthless." With a trembling hand, she clutched her belly. "Like this baby was. An abomination." Looking into Fumi's devastated eyes, Fumi saw the broken shards of dreams that had been shattered this night. Her strong, vibrant daughter seemed so small and lost. But her own love for Fumi, her only daughter, gave her the strength of 1,000 lionesses. "This child is a gift, Fumi," she said firmly. "Yes, it came, unexpectedly. But it is innocent. It is light and hope amidst this darkness." Fumi wanted so desperately to believe her mother's words. More than anything, she craved that shred of light to cling to, but her shame and fear were a thick, suffocating fog around her withering self-worth. How could she be a mother, provide for a child, when her own father had so ruthlessly rejected her? As if sensing her daughter's spiraling doubts, Fumi took Fumi's face in her hands once more, staring deeply into her eyes. "You listen to me, Olufun Malayo," she said sternly, using Fumi's full name to underscore her point. "You are strong, you are brave, and you are loved by me. That's all that matters right now." Despite herself, Fumi felt a tremulous smile tug at the corners of her mouth. Only her mother could convey such fierce compassion while using a tone that permitted no argument. Nodding slowly, fresh tears of gratitude leaving tracks down her cheeks, Fumi allowed herself to accept the truth of her mother's words. If Fumi still believed in her, she could find the wherewithal to persevere. For the first time since sharing her life-altering news, Fumi's hands caressed her belly almost protectively rather than unconsciously. "We'll get through this together." In the weeks that followed, Fumi's life, as she knew it, crumbled entirely. She was no longer welcome in her family's home, the only place she had known her entire life. Cast out into the world as an outcast, she was forced to use what meager personal savings she had to rent a cramped, dingy room on the outskirts of town. Her funds dwindled at an alarming pace, forcing her to take on odd jobs cleaning houses or running errands just to be able to afford life's basic necessities like food and rent. All the while, her belly grew larger and larger, a constant reminder of the battle she was fighting to bring new life into the unforgiving world. Fumi had never known such loneliness. Gone were the sounds of her family milling about, the smells of her mother's cooking, the familial embraces and words of encouragement. Now, she only had the cold silence and crumbling walls of her substandard living quarters to keep her company. On the nights she would lay awake, unable to sleep for fears of the uncertain future, Fumi would allow her mind to drift back to happier times. She remembered the adoring smiles and twinkling pride in her father's eyes when she brought home exceptional marks from school. She recalled the zesty aromas of egusi stew and jollof rice, and Fumi's beautiful singing voice as she cooked. She reminisced about herself and Idowu playing make-believe in the family garden as children, climbing mango trees and getting grass stained from rolling down the hillside. But those memories, once so brilliant and soul-warming, were tainted by the devastating rejection she had faced from the man she had idolized her entire life. Babatunde was supposed to be her hero, her rock, her advisor when the world became confusing. Instead, he had been the one to cruelly snuff out her light, leaving her adrift. The only solace Fumi found during the turbulent days of her new reality was in the steadfast, unwavering presence of her mother. Fumi would make the long journey to Fumi's meager rental at least once a day, laden with home-cooked meals and simple but heartfelt words of encouragement. "You don't have to struggle alone, my daughter," she said during one tearful visit as Fumi bemoaned her inability to find suitable employment to provide for her coming child. Reaching into a pocket, Fumi produced a small stack of crumpled banknotes. "Please, take this to pay your rent and buy good foods." Fumi's chest constricted with overwhelming love and gratitude for her selfless mother. But she also felt the burn of shame flush her cheeks at having to rely on charity to survive. "Oh mama, I couldn't," she said, shaking her head adamantly. Fumi would hear none of it. Grasping Fumi's hand, she pressed the money into her palm and curled her daughter's fingers over the banknotes. "Do you think you're the first woman to find herself in this situation?" she chided. "Where do you think that money came from? My own mother helped me once upon a time, so let me help you now." Fumi's eyes widened at the unexpected revelation. Never before had her mother shared any personal details of the struggles she endured. "It's the way of life," Fumi went on. "Our children keep us on our toes despite the seriousness of her words." Her warm eyes crinkled at the corners with a fond smile. Reaching out, she placed her palm against the swell of Fumi's belly. "And this one is already proving herself quite the handful." In that moment, Fumi felt the baby kick, a tiny flutter against her mother's hand. They both gasped in surprise before bursting into watery giggles, tears of hope mingling with those of joy. As Fumi's due date grew nearer, she came to depend more and more on Fumi's sage advice and steady hand to guide her through the physical tolls of pregnancy. But her mother was more than just the staunching rock against the battering waves of judgment and isolation. Fumi's mere presence was the ember of hope that kept Fumi's inner light from being extinguished completely. And so, when the pains of labor gripped Fumi in the dead of night, she did not panic or succumb to fear. She drew strength from the example her mother had shown her entire life, that of a resilient, capable, loving woman. As each contraction seized her body, she rode the crest like a warrior facing down an enemy. And when the final, furious wave threatened to break her, Fumi was right there, gripping. The cry that pierced the night was raw and primal, ripped from the very depths of Fumi's being. It was a scream of anguish, of courage, of life itself, forcing its way into the world against all odds. "Breathe, my daughter. Breathe," Fumi urged, her steady hand supporting Fumi as she bore down with every ounce of her strength. Sweat drenched Fumi's brow, her eyes squeezed tightly shut as she focused every fiber of her being on the task at hand. For 9 endless months, she had carried this new life inside her, its presence both a devastating burden and a ray of hope in the darkest recesses of her battered spirit. Now that life was fighting to be born, to take its first breath on the other side of Fumi's personal apocalypse. As another wave of contractions gripped her, she wailed through gritted teeth, certain that her body would be torn asunder from the inside out. "You're nearly there. I can see the head crowning," the midwife announced, her tone hushed yet urgent. "One more big push now." Fumi leaned in close, her cheek brushing her daughter's rain of perspiration as she spoke in Fumi's ear. "You can do this, my brave girl. Draw your courage from the love I have for you," she whispered fiercely. "The love your child will have for you. Push." With a scream that seemed to splinter the very walls around them, Fumi gave one final, bone-crushing push from the depths of her core. And then a new sound pierced the stillness, one that caused Fumi's eyes to fly open in stunned wonder. The squalling cry of new life greeted the weary world. "Congratulations, Mama," the midwife smiled, carefully lifting the squirming, purple-hued newborn up for Fumi to see through the haze of tears streaming down her face. "You have a beautiful, healthy baby girl." Fumi could only gape in awe as the midwife deftly cleared the infant's airway, that unforgettable sound of her first breath seeming to breathe new life into Fumi's battered soul as well. When the bawling bundle was nestled into the crook of her arm, Fumi instinctively pulled her close, allowing the newborn's fists to knuckle against her chest as she drank in every tiny detail. "Hello, my love," Fumi whispered, her voice thick with amazement and overwhelming emotion. The baby seemed to sense the soothing comfort of her mother's voice, settling with a contented murmur against Fumi's chest. In that infinite moment, every struggle, every fear, every self-doubt seemed to melt away like morning mist burned off by the rising sun. As she gazed in wonderment upon her daughter's scrunched face, wisps of dark hair peeking from beneath the blanket, she felt a love more profound than any she'd ever known blossom to life within her breast. This was what her mother had been gently guiding her towards all along. This was the true redemption for all her pain and anguish. A love so pure, so unconditional, that it could heal any wound and overcome any obstacle. Tears of overwhelming gratitude streamed freely down Fumi's cheeks as she turned her shining eyes towards Fumi, who hovered nearby with her own tears soaking her beaming smile. No words were spoken in that soul-binding moment. Only the gentlest of caresses as Fumi embraced her daughter and new granddaughter, joy and relief washing over them in soothing waves. They had weathered the storm together, and on the other side was the brilliant light of new hope, shining radiantly in the eyes of an innocent child. Babatunde should have been present, his face alight with the pride and wonder of a doting grandfather as he marveled over his first grandchild. Idowu also should have been cracking terrible jokes and poking gentle fun, outwardly acting put off by the entire affair but inwardly brimming with excitement over having a little niece to dote on. The extended family should have been gathered, heaping blessings and offerings upon them, as was tradition. Fumi said. Over the days and weeks and months that followed, Fumi continued to be Fumi's wellspring of strength and sage wisdom. She taught her daughter the intimate secrets of motherhood with boundless patience and a nurturing touch. From the proper way to swaddle the incessantly squirming infant, to the rhythmic motions that could soothe her ear-piercing cries, to the myriad of other learnings required to keep her granddaughter safe, healthy, and thriving. As Fumi slowly regained her sense of purpose, of self-worth, she found ways to supplement the paltry income afforded by her odd jobs. With Fumi acting as doting childminder, Fumi secured a steady position at one of the local food stalls, her magic hands turning out the most delectable jollof rice and dodo any patron had ever tasted. The smell of her food filled the bustling marketplace, drawing crowds with its tantalizing aroma. It was a source of great pride for Fumi to be able to single-handedly provide for herself and her child in this way. But most of all, it was a relief to have secured a steady income and life after the initial darkness of being outcast. Days turned to months, months turned to years, and Fumi's little girl bloomed into an energetic, always laughing toddler that brought untold joy to their modest but cozy rental home. With the income earned from the food stall and the help of Fumi's own meager life savings, they slowly began to accumulate simple furnishings and toys befitting Fumi's boundless love for her child. It seemed the two of them, confidants in their shared pact of loyalty, may be able to forge a new path forward on their own. Just a mother and child making their own way in the world, buoyed by the love and encouragement of Fumi's ever-present mother. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. One humid afternoon, Fumi was helping Fumi sort through a basket of vibrantly colored Nigerian fabrics when a sharp rapping came at the door of their small rental home. Fumi frowned at the unexpected sound, her little girl watching the door with rapt curiosity. Rising to her feet with the grace of a much older woman, Fumi answered the knock. The sight that greeted her in the doorway caused the basket she carried to slip from her suddenly trembling hands, spilling its contents at her feet. Her jaw dropped in stunned disbelief as the visitor spoke her name in a familiar baritone. Fumi. Baba, she gasped in response, her hand fluttering to her lips. There, on their humble doorstep, stood the imposing figure of Babatunde, his head hung in what could only be described as shame. And beside him, the sheepish countenance of Idowu, the face of the son who had turned his back on his own sister during her greatest trial. Fumi felt as though her breath had been stolen, her body going rigid as she registered the sight of the father and brother who had been the architects of her world's destruction just a handful of years ago. "May we come in, daughter?" Babatunde raised his head slowly, his dark eyes glistening with uncharacteristic moisture as he drank in the sight of his wife and the vestige of his shattered family within their modest dwelling. When his gaze finally fell upon the inquisitive young girl sleeping, he remained calm. "Oh, Fumi, my child," he rasped, the sound of his voice seeming to awaken his previously stone-still limbs. In 2 strides, the hulking former patriarch had his towering form on his knees before his daughter, those giant hands reaching out as if to tenderly cradle her face. Fumi instinctively recoiled, turning her body to shield her innocent daughter from this man's advance. She could scarcely believe her eyes at what she was seeing, hearing, after all this time. "Please," Babatunde began again, his broad shoulders slumped in a show of vulnerability Fumi had never witnessed from him before. "Let me speak my shame." Idowu moved to stand at his father's side, dipping his own head respectfully as he listened to the sound of Babatunde clearing his throat. "You were right," Funmaleo Babatunde said softly, though his eyes were intently fixed upon his granddaughters who was peacefully sleeping on a mat. "The mistakes were mine, not yours. I allowed pride and tradition to blind me to what truly matters." Here, his gaze turned to meet Fumi's shining eyes, an entire unspoken conversation of apology and longing seeming to pass between husband and wife, to what should have mattered most, my family. Fumi's breath caught in her throat, every hope of reconciliation she had secretly harbored for years. As Fumi stood there watching Babatunde and Idowu approach her sleeping daughter, she felt a kaleidoscope of emotions swirling within her. Part of her still harbored the sting of rejection and hurt from how they had so callously turned their backs on her during her greatest time of need. But an even greater part of her recognized the regret and shame weighing heavily on their faces. Her father, once such an imposing and self-assured man, seemed almost diminished as he took in the sight of his granddaughter's peaceful slumber. And Idowu, her brother who had idolized Babatunde through it all, appeared equally haunted by the error of his misguided loyalties. In that moment, Fumi realized that as painful as her journey into motherhood had been, it had also been a catalyst for profound growth and enlightenment for her entire family. The prejudices, the knee-jerk judgments based on antiquated traditions, the inability to look past propriety to see the human being beneath. All of those blinders had been stripped away, replaced by a deeper wisdom born of mistakes made and lessons learned. As she watched Babatunde sink to his knees beside her daughter's mat, she saw his calloused hand tremble ever so slightly before reaching out to tenderly stroke the little one's soft cheek. Idowu shuffled closer, his usual youthful bravado tempered into something far more poignant awe and reverence. This was their redemption, Fumi knew. The redemption of a family fractured by hasty conclusions and harsh words. A redemption made possible by the tenacity of a daughter who refused to let rejection diminish her own value, and the boundless love of a mother who championed that same resilience every single day. When Babatunde finally raised his remorseful gaze to lock eyes with his daughter, Fumi felt the last vestiges of resentment leave her in that instant. All she saw was her father, a deeply flawed man like any other, who had come to accept the magnitude of his grievous errors. "I have been a blind, foolish old man," he rasped, voice tight with unspeakable emotion. "Can you ever find it in your heart to forgive me, daughter?" Fumi didn't answer right away. She simply drank in the scene before her father and brother, humbled before this new life, openly accepting its innocence and blessedness, her mother's steadfast, reassuring presence at her side. And at the center of it all, her precious daughter, the angel who had managed to shatter the chains of prejudice through her mere existence. A small, serene smile tugged at the corners of Fumi's lips as she moved to join the makeshift family circle on the floor. Reaching out, she placed her palm atop her father's work-roughened hand, where it still rested against her slumbering child's cheek. "There is nothing to forgive, Papa," she said simply. "We're home now, all of us, together." And within those few words hung a multitude of meaning: acknowledgement of the pain and division in the past, acceptance of flaws and regrets, but ultimately an open embrace of redemption, healing, and unconditional love. Because at the end of the day, that was all that truly mattered. Not prestigious reputations or archaic customs, but family. As Babatunde bowed his head, releasing a shuddering breath of profound relief and gratitude, Fumi felt her own daughter begin to stir beneath their commingled hands. Bright eyes blinked open, immediately finding her mother's tender gaze and offering a toothy smile of pure delight. In that perfect moment, fractures became whole, bonds were renewing themselves in earnest, and Fumi knew her own life's journey had ultimately led her family to this, the chance to revel in life's most precious gift, unburdened by anything else. It was a new beginning. And this time they would cherish it together.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching. Kindly click the subscribe button, like, comment, and share this video. Watch out for more intriguing and eye-catching videos from your favorite YouTube channel.